And the deal, the plea deal, what I discovered while doing this book is very unfair and one-sided. First of all, I'm not talking only about Rick Gates, but he's the subject of my book, and this investigation is two huge, political forces against each other, and people like Gates and Flynn were just crushed. It's like being crushed between two huge trucks.
Just why did Rick Gates, who sees himself as innocent, decide to accept a plea deal on charges brought by special counsel Mueller? What do plea deals actually look like on the inside? What was Gates' role in the 2016 Trump campaign and inauguration? And, according to Daphne Barak, what is the broader impact of the Mueller probe on individuals involved? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. Today we sit down with Daphne Barak, an Israeli-American documentary filmmaker, journalist, and celebrity interviewer. She is author of To Plea or Not to Plea, the story of Rick Gates and the Mueller investigation, which is written from Gates' perspective based on extensive interviews. Daphne Barak, really wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
So Daphne, you've written a really fascinating book, To Plea or Not to Plea, and it's the story of Rick Gates. Now, it's very interesting because we hear a lot about Carter Page, we hear a lot about George Papadopoulos, Trump campaign people, of course, Paul Manafort, but we don't hear about Paul Manafort's number two for many years, Rick Gates, who had to plea. Tell me a little bit about why did Rick Gates come to you to do this?
I think it evolved, sort of, but I like your question about Rick Gates being sort of in the shadow. He had chosen to be in the shadows for years. He has been a number two of Paul Manafort for years, and it's bizarre that Ukraine is becoming right now so in the news, but Paul Manafort and Rick Gates have not been charged for anything to do with Donald Trump.
Right.
They have been charged for things that they've done way before they started to work for the Trump campaign and run it. And actually, Manafort was investigated by the FBI, and the FBI let it go. It just suddenly became such a priority to our country when Manafort became the campaign manager of candidate then Donald Trump. So Rick Gates has never given an interview. That's the first interview ever. I don't think many knew the name inside because he was very powerful, but I don't think many have heard his voice. He was the guy that he was a deputy he was the deputy manager of the campaign for a while. Then while Manafort was fired, he remained behind. And then Tom Barak, my friend, appointed him to be his number two as a deputy of the chairman of the inauguration committee. And he was a guy that you would call to ask for these priceless tickets for the dinners for the inauguration week, or to get your name on the transition team for a government job or a government appointment. He never actually wanted his name or his image to be known. He enjoyed this power behind the scene. So he played this role very nicely, had a really fascinating career, did mistakes as he took responsibility. I don't think the mistakes of him, Manafort, Flynn, justifies a huge punishment and the terrible publicity. But that's, of course, they were caught in a political game, right? And he never he never dreamt in his most horrific dreams that his name would become so known, and he would become so not even famous, infamous, right?
Right.
That's his life, as Michael Flynn and the other, his life was interrupted. It just stopped at that moment. I don't think there's a way to reverse it.
So did you approach Rick Gates, or did he approach you about doing this?
We met after the whole shock. The book is called To Plea or Not to Plea, the story of Rick Gates and the investigation. It's the first insight of what happened. And it's the first name because the book was initiated by the number one non-fiction book publisher in Australia, which published my famous book, Saving Amy, with Amy Winehouse. It was called 118 Days, and the film rights are being picked right now. So it was really the 118 days that Rick was thinking to plea or not to plea. And that's what triggered me, because people don't understand what plea deals are. I didn't either.
Well, that's actually something super interesting in the book. You kind of go a deep dive into the realities of him watching the other people being indicted, being charged, and so forth, and wondering what he's going to do.
And people like you and I and your viewers, and I hope none of them would ever face such situations, they don't understand what it means, a plea deal. I thought, like you probably would describe it in a similar way, that it's probably like choosing between AIDS and cancer. Very bad, two choices. And at the beginning when it happens, Rick, like many others, thought, oh, I have to fight it. I'll prove my innocence. And one thing people don't understand, that he wasn't charged about anything to do with Donald Trump. But at all points, although he had to plea afterwards, he said there was no Russian collusion. And actually he's proving it, because when he arrived to the FBI building, when he arrived to his first court appearance, he was so surprised that he didn't have an attorney, right? And he wasn't shown the charges. He still said not guilty. I said, how did you do that? And he says, well, I thought that Mueller was assigned to investigate the Russian collusion. I didn't know he had a mandate for other things. So I knew there was no Russian collusion, so I said no guilty. When I saw the charges the next day, I was like, what? What does that have to do with anything? Right. So I think to plea or not to plea is really a humane dilemma. So first of all, he wanted to fight it. Then I think people realize, and look what happened in other public trials right now when the government is really going after you, like the college scandal, right? You saw actress Felicity Huffman pled guilty. She got 2 weeks, And the other one, Lori Loughlin, who decided to fight it, it's going to 40 years, 80 charges every time. So Rick, who really intended to fight it, realized that he cannot at one point, because he didn't have the millions of Paul Manafort. And he's much younger. He has 4 kids. 3 of them are so young they don't even know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't, at one point, when I think the breaking point was that one day they doubled the charges. They added charges, but they really doubled it for, both for him and for Paul Manafort. And he just, that was the moment. He knew he couldn't take it anymore. So when I called him, and by the way, Bill, my partner, almost killed me. Are you kidding me? The FBI is going to listen to you. I said, so what? You're going to turn your back to somebody you know? I heard, and it was in the media, that he was talking to people, yes or no. But some mutual friends, mutual people of the Trump orbit, few still kept in touch with them. Few, very few. So I called and I said, look, whatever you decide to plea or not to plea, it's nobody's business. Because we also knew that Paul Manafort was pressuring him not to plea. And I cannot blame Manafort, of course. He didn't want him to go and flip against him. So I said, whatever you decide, it's not up to anybody. It's up to you, your wife, your family, your parents. You know what's good for your family. One thing I did say to him, look, they probably know everything. So just tell them the truth. Whether you decide to plea or not to plea, tell them the truth. The rest is your decision. And then when we met, he started to talk. It was very weird because, you meet with somebody who became radioactive. But I thought I owe it to myself, to be there for people who did wrong, but they didn't kill anybody, right? So when we met, he basically started to talk about his life, what's going on. And at that point, he said, and I would like to tell the story, the real story, my truth, that my kids would really read, wouldn't read the bad, the twisted media. Some of the media went against him because he couldn't talk. What could he do? And he also felt that because of his age and because he did take responsibility for mistakes that he had done, he still had a chance to go back to society, which, I hope Mike Flynn will have the same, but it's a different age, and Paul Manafort will spend some years in jail. So And because of his age, because he really felt, you know, he took responsibility, he felt he had a chance. Now, I hope he does, and I hope the book and the television clips would help him to do that, because, you know, we live in a society that you take a responsibility and you get punished, but then we are Americans, we believe in second chance. And all of these people, whether they are famous or senior or junior, like Page and Papadopoulos, they all have been through a lot and they deserve a second chance. And just because they were caught in a very political, aggressive campaign of many people in this country, and I live in Hollywood, so I know my Hollywood friends, some of them were so shocked when Donald Trump won the election in 2016 that they just refused to accept it. And instead of thinking, oh, in 4 years we can reverse it,
right.
They came with all kind of out-of-the-box investigations and impeachments and everything, which is quite a challenge to our democracy.
So I have to ask this because you're obviously someone in this Trump's orbit and so forth, and you know Gates. You're obviously very friendly to him, supportive. What makes you so sure this is the true story?
And it's a good question. And I was asked by my colleague in CBS and by you and by others, Rick Gates, one of the two charges, part of his plea deal, is that he lied to the FBI.
Right.
Now, if you notice, it's something very interesting. All of these people, whatever they were charged as part of their pleas, lying to the FBI. Mike Flynn, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, Papadopoulos, right? So it gives them a stigma of liars for the rest of their life. Even if Gates or Flynn don't get 1 day in jail, they are liars for the rest of their life, right? And it's quite a paradox, because if you read the Robert Mueller report, and I did, first of all, the investigation has been relying on Rick Gates as a key witness on both the campaign, during the campaign, and the inauguration, and other related investigation. Same thing, Mike Flynn. I mean, they are quoted all over the report. And at one point, the report is even saying about Gates that they found him as a very credible witness.
Right.
So I would think that it's quite a paradox, right? Secondly, part of this plea deal, what I found out, and that's what I really want to discuss, is really disturbing for us as human beings, all these kind of plea deals. But part of it, first of all, it's like a emotional detox. You have to come and tell them anything that you have done wrong in your life, including cheating on your wife, right? So basically, and part of the deal is they find you lying, they walk back on the deal. And that's what they claim that Paul Manafort did, which I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what they claim. So you have to really make sure that you tell the truth and you can support the truth with evidence, because they would just walk back on the deal.
Right. And it's sort of this extremely, extremely high pressure situation, because even if you don't remember something correctly, but they have some documentation that it didn't happen exactly the way that you described it, immediately you can be, like you said, a liar for life.
And the plea deal, what I discovered while doing this book, is very unfair and one-sided. First of all, I'm not talking only about Rick Gates, but he's the subject of my book, and this investigation is two huge, political forces against each other, and people like Gates and Flynn were just crushed. It's like being crushed between two huge trucks, I mean. But first of all, there's no timeline. I mean, anything in life, you have a timeline, especially bad news. The doctor would tell you tomorrow, Jan, I have to tell you, you have to go through a surgery. Your first question would be, what is the recovery time? So 3 months, 2 months, you have what to look forward, right? Jail, Felicity Huffman went to 14 days. Okay, she got to 2 days, but she knew there are 14 days, right? This is no timeline. I mean, when I decided on the book and the TV clips, we put the release date. Right now, we thought it will be after Gates' sentence, after everybody's sentence. Don't forget, Robert Mueller finished his report end of March 2018, right? 2019, I'm sorry. So, because it's such a one-sided deal that you have to please your You're the other side at all time. First of all, you waive your ability to appeal. Whatever the judge will give them, each one of them, you cannot appeal. Secondly, anytime they find, not only that if they decide you lie to them, they found in Mike Flynn case that he wasn't as collaborative as they had expected because he didn't want to testify against his ex-partner, right? Or let's say even if he was willing to testify, he didn't want to say exactly what they tell him to say. He wanted to tell his truth. So they walked back on it. They said, okay, he's going to be a hostile witness. We cannot do it. Gates never expected to testify more than one trial. The whole thing was, okay, you're going to flip against Manafort because they wanted to go above Manafort and flip him against, I mean, we both imagined the ultimate goal was Trump.
And now presumably he's going to be testifying against Roger Stone. Is that right?
And that's his third trial. He never expected it. He thought it was very traumatic to him to testify against Paul Manafort. It wasn't out of hatred, it was out of necessity. And people don't even know, I know from close sources to him, he didn't want probably to tell me to embarrass himself, that he assumed that they would give him back, if not his passport, at least would take the electrical bracelet when he agreed to plead and to be such a helpful witness. No, that was done only after he really went after Manafort in court. It was so cruel. And it was summer in D.C., you know, summer is sweating in D.C. He has 4 kids, but 3 who don't know about it. And he couldn't even go with shorts. He has to go all the time with long pants because he didn't want the kids to realize what's going on with daddy. So it's a very, very malicious situation. And as one top attorney, not of Gates, of another famous case, told me, he said, after I represented a couple of clients with plea deals, when I see a client with a plea deal, I just refer him to another attorney because I know they will lie to me, they would lie to him, I would not sleep at night. It's not a deal that you can ever go out of it victoriously and feel good about yourself. And now, as you said, it's a third trial, he's going to testify against Roger Stone. And why? And the sentencing is only, Roger Stone trial is November 6th. And Gates sentencing is only after he testified in this trial. So even if the word conditioned is not completely there, and maybe it is, basically he has to do a bloody good performance against Stone, which he doesn't want to, he likes Stone, in order to get his sentencing and to make sure that the judge would find him, abiding by all the little details of the deal. And the last thing people don't understand, you got the deal with the prosecutor, right? I mean, do you remember that Robert Mueller at the time recommended about no jail time for Mike Flynn? And you remember what happened with the judge? The judge, okay, you recommended, very nice, I don't accept it. The prosecutor didn't even think that Mike Flynn needed to testify more because unlike Gates, he wasn't part of the inauguration. He doesn't know as much as Rick Gates. So he wasn't as valuable, right? But you remember what happened. Gates went there into the court appearance, right, assuming that he's going to get maybe community service, but definitely not jail time. And boom, the judge called him a traitor. And he's still not sentenced until this very day. So it's a very, very tricky situation. Now, what's your choice? You don't have a choice because it's not that, I wish that Gates, probably looking back, I wish I didn't plea, or I don't know what Flynn is thinking, because they didn't have any choice. They don't have $20-30 million to spend. They're all broke. And the one thing I remember when Robert Mueller finished his investigation, and we all remember this Friday that all the networks were waiting and everything, and he was just leaving town, he was in his car without the suit and everything. I remember that suddenly, wow, so he finished his investigation, but since I was already so inside, I was like, so what's going on? What happened to all these people? He left town, but there's so many bodies, left
Right.
behind. I mean, these people, they have families, they lost their money, they lost their pride, they lost their jobs.
Well, and the cases, for example, with Gates, it went to the DC prosecutor. Why is it that he's telling his story now with you? And when were these interviews? And also, actually, how much time did you spend with him? You must have spent umpteen hours.
I spend a lot of time. You're funny because President Trump asked me, Daphne, how did he get to you? Because we are, my partner Bill and I are part of his social circle. We meet in Mar-a-Lago, we meet in Bedminster, we meet at his other clubs. So we meet privately. So Trump is suddenly asking, how did Gates get to you? Of course he knew Gates well. Didn't make sense at the beginning. And it just started very innocently when, if you remember, after Donald Trump nailed the nomination for the party, actually just before, he was the leading candidate. And before the convention in July 2016, there was a fear in the Trump team that Ted Cruz, who couldn't really reconcile with the victory of Trump over him, would try to steal the delegates. And for that reason, Eric Trump, who is a friend of ours, I mean, the Trump family has been my friend for a long time, asked me if Bill and I would agree to be delegates. He knew that nobody could buy us lunch and steal our votes, right? So I said, with pleasure. So he sent an email and he said, Daphne, meet Rick Gates. He is in charge of the delegates. And Rick, I can't remember the exact words, but you must know about the very special friendship between my family and Daphne. And that's how it started. And we didn't become friends or anything. We talked on the phone several times. But then, you know, we stayed at the Trump Hotel during the inauguration, before, afterwards. And, you know, Rick was based there with Tom Barak and the team. And we started to be friendly, not intimately friendly, but, you know, more and more friendly. And he was part of the scene. Rick Gates was not Paul Manafort. He was not flashy. He didn't, you know, so he was very liked. And then he became involved with the America First. It was him and Nick Ayers and Brad Pascal at the beginning. So he was part of the Trump orbit. And the day, that Friday, which I'm sure everybody remembers, that Friday that rumor was starting to circulate that there would be the two first indictments
Right.
of the Robert Mueller investigation. Everybody was speculating in Washington, who, why, whatever. I remember Bill and I were flying from San Diego. We took the red eye to DC with the then Congressman Darrell Issa. And he just reminded me this night when he bought the books. And he said, and we were thinking, who can it be? You know, we all said probably Paul Manafort. It was after they raided his house.
Right.
And Mike Flynn, because at that point it was known that Mike Flynn was investigated. But Rick Gates' name didn't come there. I remember that Sunday morning, before we took this flight, he called me because we were supposed to meet on Monday at 5 p.m. with mutual friends at the Trump Hotel. And he asked me, who do you think it was? Of course, I didn't even think about anything because it was the topic of the conversation anywhere. I said, I don't think it's you because they didn't even raid your house. Little did I know that his name appeared in almost every email of Paul Manafort. He probably had a premonition, but he wasn't sure. But that's very humane. I mean, and that's it. We landed on Monday morning at the hotel. And I remember when I went to the shower, my husband suddenly screamed, "It's Rick Gates!" I went out and I saw in the Trump Hotel, like, boom, like Rick Gates. And I remember my stupid response was probably, okay, I guess we don't have a 5 p.m. coffee, right? And we went down to breakfast at the hotel and everybody was looking. It was like Rick Gates was not there physically. He was on his way to the FBI building, but he was there everywhere. If you know how the Trump Hotel is, you have very, very big screens, you know, and one is on CNN, one on Fox, and everything, you know, everybody, you saw the image of Rick Gates, and it was like everybody was shell-shocked because unlike Manafort, who was never part of the scene in the Trump Hotel and part of us, he was part of the scene. And it's like, how did it happen? And he became, over one moment, he became radioactive. I mean, the guy that everybody was still trying to call and get connections or anything, boom. And it came to my mind what happened to these people, talking about him, Flynn, and I will go to Papadopoulos and Carter, which I don't know later, I'll tell you the difference. But came to my mind what happened when I agreed to meet with him later. And I remember I lost one of the telephone numbers, the mobiles of one of the senators. So I said, oh, do you have it handy? So he's giving it to me and he's showing me and he says, hey, I may be one of the only one in the world to have a Rolodex, almost like yours, with all the numbers that everybody wants. But then he looked so shocked and he said, but I can't use it. I cannot call anybody. Nobody will accept my call. And that was the big moment that I understood what happened to these people from there to there. I mean, over a moment.
In one moment that day, which you experienced at the Trump Hotel, Rick Gates goes from being, the guy everybody wants to know to becoming the guy that nobody wants to know.
They were scared even to call. I mean, one of our friends, who is the son of an ambassador, was running after me, could you arrange for me a meeting with Rick Gates? He wanted to do business with him. Rick was, at that point, the right-hand man of billionaire Tom Barak, who is a good friend of mine, a friend of the president. So people still wanted his contact. And boom, suddenly this guy, the guy was so, he was trying for weeks to sit down with him, was sitting still with me and Bill at 5 p.m. With others and like, oh my God, did somebody call him? How is it? He wouldn't call, you understand that? Right. I mean, like, it was, and that's the difference, which I don't know Carter Page and I don't know George Papadopoulos, and they may be wonderful people, but they were junior. I mean, when Donald Trump says, I didn't know them, he's not lying. You know what campaign means, He probably met them because there are photos, but he probably didn't have an idea because he was running from one state to another. He did spend a lot of time, although in a short period, with Paul Manafort. And Rick Gates was the one who, Paul Manafort stayed back in the headquarters and doing strategy, and Rick Gates was the one who was going with Trump. So, I mean, they did know him very well. And when you think about him or General Flynn, that some like to say that Barack Obama fired him, but he was a very decorated general. Their life, interrupted forever. I mean, how can you ever reverse it?
So we're going to show a couple of exclusive clips from your interviews. You can just tell me in very shortly what they're about.
Let me tell you a juicy one. Let me tell you an intimate one. Juicy one, I think it's hilarious. So nobody remembers how Omarosa got...
I know, it's incredible. It's in the book. She basically hired herself,
yeah,
right?
And made her own press release. I mean, it's just brilliant, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a convention, and I know because Bill and I were two delegates, and convention is so hectic, and you're running and everything. And she goes to Paul Manafort, and she said, oh, Paul, I decided it's high time for me to be involved in the campaign in a big role, whatever. And he's running, and he said, oh, we'll talk about it later, right?
To me, I was quite taken aback by her effort to become part of our campaign. And it's a very brief story. I ran into Omarosa at the end of the convention in the hallway, and she stopped me and she goes, Rick, I'm very excited to be working with you. I talked to Paul, we're all set. I'll be sending out my press release tomorrow. And I had no idea what that meant. I assumed that Paul had talked to her and that she was going to be a part of the campaign. But until later that evening, when I talked to Paul about several issues, and he said, by the way, I ran into Omarosa. I understand she's on the campaign now. Is that correct? Because a lot of what I had to do was coordinate the onboarding of campaign staff, and especially given the fact that it was after the convention, we were ramping up now. So Paul kind of looked at me and said, I have no idea what she's doing. She stopped me in the hallway and said, Paul, I'm ready to work on the campaign. And Paul had told me that he said, great, we'll talk about it. And the next thing we know, she assumed great meant I'm on board. And sure enough, she's did a fantastic job of sending her press release out the next day. The next thing you know, Omarosa is part of our campaign.
So that's a funny one. On the other one, there was a very intimate one. I think people don't know about the relationship between Trump and Melania, Donald Trump and Melania, and because of all kind of tabloid stories and stuff, people assume things which are really baseless. So Bill and I have met them in private settings, and I can just tell you, they're so united. He really cares about her, and he really listens to her opinion, and they're really bonded, even more today than maybe before. Maybe they were always united because, they're so surrounded with people taping them behind their back, writing books behind their back, all kind of people that Donald helped and she helped. That, of course, you can just imagine the loneliness. But there's a beautiful story. We all remember that it was such a big deal out of nothing, again, the convention, that Melania was beautiful. She opened the convention on Monday night, and Donald Trump introduced her. And he loved the speech, right?
Absolutely. And it was a fantastic speech. The delivery was great. I mean, it was really the first time that Melania had been exposed at that level, to kind of the American public. I mean, she had done some campaign events, but not to the extent of this. And in this one, the focus was all on her, and everybody was listening to kind of her words and what it meant in terms of her view of her husband.
Now, I was a delegate, so I watched it. I remember it was really received beautifully. I mean, she's a beautiful woman. I mean, the speech was from the heart. But then later that night, something happened. What happened?
Yeah, so we received a call by one of the, great mainstream media reporting outlets, and had suggested that parts of Melania's speech seemed to, align with a speech Michelle Obama had given in 2008. And, we didn't have any information in this regard, so we began the drill of understanding what they were trying to suggest. And it was a very, very frustrating process because, again, we thought the media was attacking, the president and his family on a very simple speech. And so it was kind of, angering to some extent to have now the media question every word in the speech when they had never done this to, any other candidate.
And by the way, they were showing, they were splitting the screen.
Yeah, and then later
on, they were showing Michelle and Melania, yeah?
Yes, they were showing not only clips of the speech, but clips of their speeches in person. And it was designed to take away from Melania's moment, which is what the media was trying to do.
So Donald Trump took the plane back to New York because, traditionally he was not supposed to be in the convention before the last night. And he called Rick Gates. That's the first time that people who are not like me, part of the orbit, heard about the name Rick Gates, because apparently he was the one accused of this big error, which I don't agree.
Plagiarism.
Yeah. So Donald Trump calls Rick Gates, and Rick suddenly is witnessing a very intimate moment between Donald and Melania Trump. And Trump is so caring about Melania. He doesn't even think about himself, because she just thought that because it was the first night, she really ruined the whole convention. And by the way, she didn't. She was beautiful. She was very emotional. She was very moving.
She felt like she had put him and the campaign in a very difficult position. And it was hard because she'd given such a great speech, delivery, content, telling us about her husband in her words. I mean, she got great accolades for it. And then to have the media kind of come down on her for, this issue was frustrating. So she was very upset. And, Mr. Trump was, again, very supportive and, just kind of said, Melania, everything's going to be okay.
And, people like to say that Trump cares only about himself. And, he has this bravado and ego, and I've known him since I'm 20, and that's part of his personality. But when it comes to Melania, he does love her, he does care about her. And there's some, very intimate moments there that are endearing to know. And it's actually beautiful that Rick noticed it in the middle of all this convention and this. I mean, he noticed it. So
Interesting.
And I did tell the president about it.
So there is, one of the, I don't know if it's called it a subtext, but one of the things that comes out in the book is this process. Manafort, and by extension Gates, were focused on, because of their connections to Ukraine and Russia, right? Manafort had worked there and Gates had worked there. And in fact, it's described that, he spent more time in Ukraine sometimes than at home and so forth. They were working on campaigns. It's interesting that right now, as we speak, Ukraine is a big, big deal. It's a centerpiece of all these impeachment inquiry talks and so forth. I'm very curious, do you see any connection there?
I have to tell you, Jan, that when I wrote the book, and it was months ago, it takes time to get to the process, I didn't even think to include Ukraine. I remember my Australian publisher, Fiona, and then Kate Harston from Center Street told me, they actually were on the same page, shouldn't we tell a bit about who the guy is, more the background? And I said, okay, Ukraine, but who cares really, And I decided to include it just because they asked me. And there is something very interesting in the light of what's happening right now. And if you look at the timeline, Manafort and Gates actually operated there, and I say it installed or helped installing a president who was pro-Russian, right? He actually won the election, but they thought he was rigging the election, so he brought a Ronald Reagan American consultant, Paul Manafort, to get him elected, and Rick came with him. So at that point, Rick is brutally honest. I really admire it, and at that point I didn't find it very important, but I included it. But look what's happening right now. He explained that while Manafort was very into the political game, winning election, creating a democracy from scratch, creating a party which would take the majority of the parliament in Ukraine, and for that reason, they will elect their president, right? Who was ousted, in 2014. Yes. So while Manafort was really into the political game, it's in his blood, right? And he loved playing it, and I guess he did it very well, right? Rick, who is much younger, said, I was less into that. I was more about the model, the financial model. I said, what's the model? The model was apparently invented by Manafort. And Rick Davis, I happen to know Rick Davis. I met him with John McCain. He was his campaign manager. And they were partners, and they took Rick under the wing. And the model is actually very brilliant and really explains what happens today and what has happened during the Biden and Obama and all that. It basically, after you install a leader in an overseas country, especially a country like Ukraine, which is, problematic and has on one end resources of oil and gas, and on the other hand, it's an invitation for corruption because it's a political transition. So after you install the leader, you have to make the money. And that's what Rick likes. That's what they call the model. And the model was that an investor who had supported the previous guy before the new leader, had to be protected because they had investments there. They didn't want it to be confiscated. They didn't want it to be hurt. Right. So they needed to be protected. On the other hand, they brought new investors, right? So for Rick, it was not the political chase. He said, I didn't mind doing the political game because the award was really to do the business. He liked doing the business, right? So not that Manafort didn't like the business because, as you know, he made millions. But for him, for Manafort, it was a political chase. For Gates, it was more the financial model. And if you think about what's happening today, and the timeline that there was there, that's the timeline of Barack Obama and Joe Biden, right? So it explains what's happening right now. And don't forget that people forget that the Manafort was operating with Podesta, the Clinton associate, right? So it's very telling. I mean, I don't think that today Rick would be so brutally, I mean, he would be because I would ask him and he would have to answer, but I don't think he would be that brutally honest about really the model because it's just so associated with what's going on. And I'm just praying that he won't be caught in another investigation because now we have the impeachment. I'm just praying. I think I'm praying for him and his wife and his family that he's not, that he doesn't have what we call a chapter 2, right?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in your book because of some of this, kind of Ukraine operations details in the early chapters. So, Daphne, any final words?
I think besides the political trauma that which we have all been going through, whether you are a friend of Donald Trump like myself or you hate his guts, I mean, nobody is just doesn't have opinion. Either you hate him or love him. So regardless, I think we have to remember that there are human beings there, On one end, think about Donald and Melania, that they've been betrayed by some of the people they helped. Melania was also betrayed by a close friend. I mean, I'm not going to reveal private conversation, but it's painful. It's really to be backstabbed and betrayed again and again, not to be able to trust anybody. I mean, the last thing I have to reveal is that one of the last few times I spoke with the president in a private setting. It wasn't the last one, it was a few weeks ago. We wanted to talk about something, and he told me, come and whisper to me. I mean, we are talking one-on-one, but come and whisper to me. And he just didn't want people to read our lips. So everybody in that private setting is looking, oh my God, look at Daphne, she's whispering to the president 30 minutes. But he really didn't want people to read his lips, my lips. Could you imagine living like that? That's one thing. And this is a guy that we entrusted, whether half of the country liked the fact that he was elected or not, he was elected, fair and square. This is a guy that we entrusted to go and protect us from ISIS, to keep us secure, to make sure our economy is great. And it just I can't believe that he can concentrate, and he does, by the way, with all these, surrounding, with no support, with hardly any support system. So that's the idea. And the second thing, the people who were caught in between, like Rick Gates, like Paul Manafort, like Michael Flynn, like the Moore Jr. There's a wonderful guy that I think maybe I talked once during a campaign, I can't even remember, Michael Caputo, right? Mm. He had to sell his house. He's just a witness. I mean, so all these people, just because he was caught in the investigation, he's not accused of anything. He was just a witness. So all these people, their life has been interrupted forever. And where do you go from there?
Daphne Barak, such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.